It began with a wall of wind that made the ocean stand up like a moving cliff. On the Florida coast, the sky pressed low and dirty, the air so charged it felt like a hand on your back. People near Mosquito Inlet, what would become Ponce Inlet, watched the Atlantic twist itself into a white, seething plain. Beyond the gray horizon, a steamship fought to keep her bow into the seas. She was the city of Vera Cruz of the Ward Line, outward bound from New York for Havana and then Veracruz, Mexico, with passengers, mail, and a hold full of cargo. In late August and early September of 1880, a great hurricane came boiling up the coast, and when the steamer met it, there was no room left to dodge. By the time she reached the Florida shore, the storm had its full, punishing stride. On the bridge, men were roped in. Seas shouldered across the foredeck and smashed through ventilators. Bulkheads boomed like drums. Below, families huddled in cabins that banged and shuddered as if a giant had taken the ship in both hands and was trying to break her across his knee. Oars, canvas, lifebelts, anything that was not already secured, was lashed down. The compass jerked with each blow, the needles quivering, and the log was useless. Land was somewhere to port. Breakers announced it before anyone saw it. The coast here is treacherous in the best weather. Sandbars shift like living things. The Gulf Stream runs hard close offshore. With the hurricane on top of that, the sea became a machine that did not forgive mistakes. The captain tried to gain sea room, then to anchor, then to keep the bow into the seas and ride it out. None of it held. A sudden sliding blow took the steamer sideways. The next wave lifted her, swung her, and set her down hard. Wood cracked. Something under the keel tore and screamed. The city of Vera Cruz had grounded. People on shore, driven to the beach by flooding and fear, saw her appear and vanish behind banks of spray. In the short, terrible glimpses when the rain slanted just right, the ship was side-on to the surf, masts whipping, funnel shaking, tiny figures moving in the scant lee of the deckhouses. Every few seconds a deep concussion rolled across the flats as a wave exploded through the ship's side. A signal rocket clawed into the wind and died. There was nothing small boats could do. The first dories launched were taken like leaves and hurled back against the hull. Men with lines around their waists tried the surf and were flung out like broken oars. Inside the ship, finality gathered. Water came in sheets through split seams. A steward shouldered a door only to find the corridor he had just left, the deck having pitched so violently that his world had changed direction. Passengers prayed in half a dozen languages. A mother wrapped her little girl in a shawl and tied the knot with her teeth. An engineer slapped a valve wheel that would not turn and thought, absurdly, of his supper cooling in New York. The captain kept his voice even and his orders plain. Lower away, stand by lines, hold fast. The first boat touched water and vanished. The sea seized it and dashed it under the quarter. A second hung in the tackles long enough to give hope. Then a green sea leapt the rail and pitched it broadside. When the water swept on, there were hands on the thwart and no faces, and then not even the hands. The crew threw rafts over. A few men and 2 women made one of them. Another wave picked it up and dropped it end first, and everyone went into the surf anyway. Floating timber became both salvation and weapon. It held you up and then broke your ribs. To live, you had to choose which pain you could stand. The ship herself began to come apart. Plating parted at seams. Deck planks curled and tore loose like thrown cards. The funnel went with a hinge-sounding groan and took part of the bridge with it. Onshore, close enough now to see faces in the narrow, shifting windows of visibility, people could only watch. Some wept from helplessness and wind. A few went into the surf again and again with lines around their waists. Most were pulled back blue-lipped and empty-handed. The hurricane roared so loudly that it felt like a thing pressing you to your knees. Those who lived did so by a chain of seconds and yards. One sailor, lashed to a cork lifebelt, was pitched across the bar into the inlet and carried south by the current. He drifted for hours, the wind ripping the breath out of him each time he tried to lift his head. He crawled ashore with his clothes torn away and his skin flayed where the belt had chafed him all night. Another survivor clung to a hatch cover, counting the time between seas the way a man counts his own pulse. At dawn, he was thrown high onto wet sand and lay there tasting the sweet, heavy air of still being alive. Morning showed what night had done. The beach was carpeted with wreckage, cargo crates, cabin doors, brass fittings, pieces of ore. A pocket watch still ticked in a coat that had no owner. The engine room, open to the sky, hissed and steamed like a wounded animal. Local men walked the tide line with blankets and sheets. Women boiled coffee and tore old linens into bandages. In the days ahead, numbers would harden. Scores dead, only a handful saved. But on that beach, the count was names and faces. Telegrams went north. Agents took statements. Newspapers tried to shape the night into columns and inches, writing of a ship bound for Havana and Veracruz that broke within sight of land while people stood and watched and could not help. The inquiry that followed did what inquiries always do. It asked about charts and bearings, anchors and signals, the barometer, and the decisions made in a wheelhouse where the glass was blown white with spray. It measured courage in phrases and seamanship in hindsight. But a hurricane is not a defendant that can be cross-examined. It is a scale of force, and that night, the city of Veracruz met a scale beyond what her iron steam and human will could answer. For the coast, the memory lasted. Fishermen learned to work around timbers that shifted with the sand. Children found china and coins in the rack line and carried them home like relics. Old-timers could point to the place and say, "There, where the tide runs like a river. That is where the big steamer broke." And when the weather flags went up again in other years and the palmettos began to thrash and the sky took on that sick, greenish light, people remembered the night when a ship died within shouting distance, and the sea did not care. If you want to understand the power of water and wind, stand on that shore in your mind and measure the distance from the wreck to the houses. Then watch the waves tear iron and oak the way a child tears paper. Watch men with ropes disappear and reappear as if the ocean were blinking. Remember that somewhere among the trunks and mail bags were letters never read, and gifts never given, and small lives that might have been. The Atlantic kept some of them and returned the rest in pieces. The lesson it left is simple, unanswerable, and forever. The sea is near, and it is stronger than we are. Later reports placed the wreck about 13 miles northeast of Cape Canaveral, near the inlet where the tide runs like a river. When the lists were reconciled, the best count said 69 lives had been lost, and only a handful saved. Ward line officers, used to the steady rhythm of New York, Havana, Veracruz, walked the beach with their hats in their hands. Witnesses said the storm tore the clothes from survivors and even strips of skin, and some men drifted in the water for 20 hours before crawling ashore. Terrible details stick because they explain nothing and therefore refuse to fade. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.